So I've been running this D&D campaign for my friends over the last year that's basically an adaptation of Greg Stafford's very cool Great Pendragon campaign. And if you have no idea what that is, basically it's set in King Arthur's England, and you play year by year through all of Arthuriana, beginning with the reign of King Uther Pendragon and ending with Arthur's death. Spoilers for the matter of Britain. It's heavily based on Le Morte d'Arthur by Sir Thomas Malory, and it takes some influence from other works as well. But I mean, the basic idea is that you play as knights, you go on quests, and it all happens over the course of like a set timeline in a semi-historical setting. So you go on adventures in the summer and you run a manor in the winter. You're more playing the house than you are playing a single character. So it has this kind of cool shift between like bottom up and top down gameplay where you're being told what to do and where to go during the summer months, kind of like a D&D campaign, a traditional D&D campaign. And then you're making decisions for your family and fiefdom during the winter, kind of like Crusader Kings. So my campaign follows these 7 knights from the county of Salisbury as they go on grand adventures, like stealing the sword that will one day become Excalibur from a giant, fighting in some epic battles against the invading Saxon hordes, and of course, stealing horses. And that last one happens. It happens a lot, actually. So more than you would expect, not as much as you would hope. And while those other stories sound and are very cool, and I'd love to tell them sometime, it's really that horse theft that kind of kicks off our first story, the first one I wanted to tell. So we kick things off with 2 of our newly made knights riding into the neighboring county of Silchester with the expressed intent of stealing horses from one of the local lords. See, Sir Fane and Sir Aaron, at this point, they've been knights for a little over a year, and while they've had experiences at war and they've had a few adventures already, they're still really young. So they're hungry for glory and they're just eager to prove themselves. And they feel like, raiding one of the neighbors from another county, obviously, is going to be a good way to just start establishing themselves and getting a little bit of extra money going on for them and for their new families, basically. So it's the height of summer, and with just nothing better to do, really, they head over to the manor of Bagshot and start raiding the stables. But the problem is that the local lord, Sir Garin, he has a large family and a bunch of household knights of his own. So as soon as they're discovered, things go really badly for them. I mean, all of these knights just rush out, and they're much more experienced, and they're older, and they've been fighting the Saxons for years. So they just start trouncing our heroes. And I mean, Sir Garin just soundly beats Fane and Aaron, and he unhorses Aaron, so Fane has to ride by and swoop her up and put her on the back of his horse, and they're forced to retreat. So while they ride hard for the border, Sir Garin, he takes Aaron's horse and he just leads it back to his own stable. He just steals Aaron's horse. And what he doesn't know, however, is that this action, this singular thing, is going to be what leads to the death of not only himself, but the death of everyone he knows and loves. So, licking her wounds back in Salisbury, Sir Aaron goes to visit her friend Sir Cadagrin, another one of our heroes. So Sir Cadagrin, he has by this point already established himself as one of the most formidable of the 7 knights. And the year previous, fresh off of being knighted, Sir Cadagrin, he had taken the field at the Battle of Muircred Creek, and he had rallied just a small host of knights and just started wrecking shop on a bunch of Saxons. And there's 2 things that Cadagrin hates. So it's horse thieves and it's injustice. Subjectively speaking, of course. I mean, obviously, if it happens to his friends, it's wrong. If they're doing it, he'll turn a blind eye. But still, regardless, furious at the horse thievery perpetrated against his friends, Cadagrin just leaps onto his steed and he rides for Bagshot, spear in hand, armor just gleaming in the midsummer sun. Cadagrin, he just calls out Sir Garin. He just rides right up to Bagshot, calls out Sir Garin directly, just ready to win back his friend's horse. And then Sir Garin comes out. And there's this moment between the 2 of them. And then, obviously, all of Sir Garin's friends and family, they just come rushing out too, and they gang up on Cadagrin and beat the hell out of him. And, I mean, again, they're more experienced and significantly more numerous than Cadagrin. He puts up a fight, but in the end, he's forced to ride back to Salisbury in defeat. So at this point, 3 of the 7 knights have been just soundly bested by the Knights of Bagshot, and violence is clearly not working in their favor. So at this point, I think most D&D party members and most D&D parties would probably choose to just triple down on the violence and ride back in full force, just wounded and all, to burn down Bagshot and just seek revenge and steal the horse back. Instead, Sir Aaron tries a what is kind of a novel approach in tabletop RPGs. So she actually decides to go the diplomacy route. So she calls on her friend Sir Ilwa de Stapleford, another one of the 7 knights. Now, even at this point in the campaign, Ilwa is a lot of things. So he is a romantic. He's already like desperately trying to court like 2 different heiresses at the same time. He is the former ward and squire of Earl Roderick, the Earl of Salisbury. And most importantly, among the 7 knights, he's the one most gifted with grace and charm. So if anyone could peacefully resolve this without further violence, it's Ilwa. Everyone thinks that. Everyone's sure of that. Peace was never an option because when Ilwa arrives at Bagshot, he critically fails his diplomacy check. And when I say he fails, I mean he fails so spectacularly that he somehow manages to convince Sir Garin to believe that it was his horse, Ilwa's own horse, that he had come to retrieve, and that he was responsible for both raids. So naturally, Sir Garin, he gives a shout to, and his entire family just comes running out into this, like, after this 3rd raid attempt. They're all armed for bear, and they're ready to beat the hell out of whoever's here. And before Ilwa can even consider just backtracking, they just surround him and start dogpiling him. They like pull him down from his horse and they just start pummeling him with clubs, and like they're cutting him with their swords and stabbing him with like pointy sticks, throwing rocks at him, and it's just awful. And to be clear, Ilwa is a lover, not a fighter. Like mechanically, he is a 1st level bard. He's very quickly overmatched, and he came alone because it was diplomacy, and his friends are already beat up from the year they've been having. So armed and armored, like Ilwa, he pulls his sword out, he gets up off the ground, he starts just swinging it wildly, cuts his way to the stables, and he manages to grab a hold of the contested horse, complete with Sir Garin's saddle still on it. And so he jumps up onto the horse and he rides hard for Salisbury. His own horse, it takes the hint and it starts traveling after him because it's well trained. So he rides for the border as quickly as possible. The whole time the Bagshots are on his heels in just hot pursuit, and they're only stopped at the border by the arrival of a patrol from Salisbury led by much more experienced knights. So Ilwa is able to rescue the horse, brings it back to Sir Aaron, and this begins really just the big feud between the 7 knights and the House of Bagshot. For the entire year following Ilwa's daring escape, tensions are high between the 7 knights and the Bagshots, who take just every opportunity at every feast to level insults towards Ilwa, or, just towards Earl Roderick, towards Salisbury in general. So, even so, our heroes continue to find ways to just heap glory onto themselves. I mean, they're the rising stars of Salisbury. So, some war happens, knights get married, our heroes are recruited by Merlin to get a sword for King Uther by killing a giant in a magic cave, just adventures. So, then comes New Year's Day, where all of the Knights of Logres are gathered together for a brief reprieve from the ongoing war against the Saxons, and everyone meets in Salisbury, and King Uther presides over the festivities in person, and it just becomes this legendary feast with King Uther's bastard son, Prince Madoc, finally receiving his father's acknowledgement. I mean, Merlin, the magician, unveils the sword that our heroes had taken from the knight in the cave, the sword Caliburn, the sword of kings, the future Excalibur, which he gifts to King Uther as a sign of his true kingship. I mean, this is a huge, momentous event. Cadagrin ends up fighting some horse thieves. I think Fane puts out a fire. There's just a lot going on at this feast, to the point where, like, Uther getting Excalibur is almost a side note. But I want to specifically zoom in on what happens with Ilwa. Because while the feast is in full swing, Ilwa finds himself just distracted for no reason that he can fathom. I mean, this is a very opulent feast, but he just feels himself overcome with dread, just bordering on claustrophobia. He's going to have a panic attack. I mean, his friends are off doing whatever they're doing. They're rescuing maidens and they're doing all these things at the feast. Because again, a lot's going on. And he's just sitting here all alone in a hall full of people, and he just feels as though at any moment something terrible is going to happen. So, feeling himself compelled to escape the hall and certain doom, Ilwa he takes off, he goes outside, and he just makes his way into the snow of early March. A snow that has begun to just fall thick and heavy in the night. And he goes to the stables, which are not yet plagued by horse thieves at this point in the night. It's still early. And he collects his horse, he mounts up, and he just decides to go for just a little bit of a ride to clear his head. So he heads out through the city gates of Sarum, and he goes out into the countryside. And out in the wilderness, beyond the Earl's capital, his head becomes clearer, and the dread begins to just kind of melt away from his mind, even as the snow itself becomes heavier and heavier, just making the world blindingly white and black all at once, because it's pitch dark outside at this point. And I mean, realizing that he's becoming lost, Ilwa begins to just turn back towards Sarum. I mean, he's got his fresh air, and he's went for his ride, so he's just going to head back to the feast at this point. And that's when he sees a rider off in the distance. And, he thinks that it's got to be just a fellow traveler who's just become lost in the storm, and so he makes his way toward the figure to kind of help them out. And it's only too late that he realizes what he's actually looking at. As he approaches, Ilwa realizes that the form that he is riding towards, it's not a person on top of a horse at all. In fact, it looks more, as he becomes closer and closer to it, it looks more like a person who has been flayed. And the horse, its mount, is joined to it. And he's just staring at this fleshy, flayed abomination that kind of shuffles unnaturally forward through the snow towards him as it sees him. And in his mind, all the stories he has heard, because again, he's a bard, all the stories he's heard from the far north come just rushing back to him. And he remembers the story of this terrible thing from far beyond Hadrian's Wall, a demon from the Orkney Isles called the Nucalavi. And he has no idea why this thing would be this far south, how he would possibly have come in contact with it, but there it is, standing in front of him, and he's not sure if it's some kind of delusion or if he's going crazy or what exactly is happening. Maybe he had too many drinks. He's not sure what happened exactly, but what he does know is that this thing lives up to its fearsome reputation. Before he can wheel his horse to run from it, this thing is already charging at him, and it has this bony spear thing in its hand, and as soon as it catches up to him, and it moves faster than his horse does, as soon as it catches up to him, it just stabs his horse right through the neck, and it just sends it spilling to the ground and spraying blood everywhere. He's falling, he's crashed to the ground, he scrambles back to his feet. He only has his sword with him. That's the only thing he has on him. He doesn't have any kind of armor, really. He grabs his sword, and he doesn't do the suicidal thing of trying to fight this thing. He runs. He runs from the thing into the darkness of this forest that's nearby, and he tries to hide under a fallen tree, but the Nucalavi, it will not be denied. It hunts for him. It stalks him through the woods. Its hooves just falling and crunching through the snow, snapping wood beneath their weight. And as this thing nears him, he can see its breath, hot and foul, and as it steams through the flurries, just sending snowflakes just spiraling, dancing away, polluted by its wickedness. And as it steps, it leaves these red hoof prints staining the snow behind it. And Ilwa, he holds his breath as it approaches his shelter, just pausing, hoping that it won't see him. And almost matching him, it stops. And immediately he knows he's been seen, and he just braces himself to fight this thing, to die painfully in the cold and the dark of the wilderness, because he knows he cannot possibly stand a chance against some hellish abomination like this. But it doesn't charge him, and it doesn't even lift its lance. Instead, it just kind of stands there for a moment. And then a long, dark cloud comes out of its horse mouth like ink in a glass of milk. This miasma just dances through the drifting snow, its tendrils spreading in all directions, just snaking through the air until, despite his recoiling, it touches the flesh of Ilwa's face. At once, he feels this pain spread through his body, just pustules and blisters forming across his skin. The sores weep through his clothes. His joints buckle all at once, and what energy he has left flees from him. So Ilwa just crashes down to the snow. He falls to his knees, and this sound of him falling, it draws the Nuklavi closer to him. It crunches steadily toward him as he lays there, too weak to even cry into the snow, just a field of white embracing him as he lays there, accepting him, numbing his skin where it touches. And he can hear the Nuklavi coming. He can feel its approach, and it seems all over for him until a voice cuts through the night. And it's a voice he recognizes. With a defiant yell, Sir Aaron charges through the darkness and the snow, her lance ready. And see, she had followed Ilwa from the feast, followed him through the snowy wild until she'd lost him in the blizzard. And when she'd found his horse dead in this pool of red snow, she follows his tracks through into the woods, and then with just some miraculous twist of fortune, she finds her friend just in the nick of time. And she starts charging at this thing because she doesn't know what else to do. And she's just hurling curses at this thing. And it rears and it charges right back at her. It challenges her as it levels its spear at her. And she levels her spear at it. And it is not a pretty meeting. The Nuklavi takes Sir Aaron's lance full into its flayed torso, just undeterred. And it brings its own spear to bear against her, and the padding that she has just thrown on, really, over the gown that she was wearing to the feast, it turns this bony spear aside, just preventing her from dying in one blow. But even still, it cuts deep, and it just shreds this gambeson. So even so, I mean, the momentum just carries her off of her mount and to the ground, and her spear, it just goes flying off into the darkness. So she scrambles back to her feet, draws her sword as fast as she can, and she just plants her feet to meet the Nuklavi's second pass. And this time, her armor, it doesn't avail her at all against this creature's spear. And, I mean, though she manages like a deep cut along this horse thing's body, she comes away much the worse for wear. I mean, her gambeson, like I said, it's shredded. It's in ruins at this point. And the gown she had worn to the feast, I mean, it has just swiftly been dyed a deep crimson from the monster's onslaught. Still, she stands her ground. Its hoofbeats thunder towards her, kicking up red snow in the creature's wake. And as it falls upon her, Sir Aaron, she raises her sword once more, and the spear comes out of her back. She gets run through, and suddenly she's off the ground. I mean, she feels the ground just vanish beneath her feet, and she realizes that she is being held aloft on this lance with this monster below her, just relishing in the rain of her lifeblood. And then she feels the ground come back to her just as suddenly. And the Nuka-Lavi, it's planted her in the snow, pinned her there with its terrible spear. And Sir Aaron, she looks up at the sky as the snow falls. And then this thing comes into her vision. And then it fills her vision, staring down at her, its horse eyes burning, red as a torch in her face, and its human head is lolling to one side, just appraising its work, almost bonelessly. And then, just as suddenly as that, boom, there's a crash behind her, behind the creature, rather, and Ilwa himself has thrown himself toward the Nuka-Lavi with every bit of strength left to him. He just jumps from Sir Aaron's horse. He jumps from the horse. He plants this sword in this thing's back. And he starts riding the Nuka-Lavi, just hammering with every ounce of strength he has, trying to drive this sword deeper into this creature's back. And then it lurches. And Ilwa is certain for a moment, for a brief second, that this thing it's dead. It's been killed. I mean, he has hammered this sword until the hilt touches its bloody flesh. He has beaten his hands raw, slamming the sword into this thing through its vertebrae. And so with this thing kind of listlessly trotting around, Ilwa slumps against the sword. His hands still just hamburger meat at this point. He's bordering on unconscious already, but at least he's killed this thing. He lifts his head, and as he does so, this thing's neck twists all the way back around, spinelessly, to look him in the eyes. And then, in an instant, it grabs him from behind with its enormous arms. It reaches back, digs its claws into his back, and it flings him overhead through the air to crash into a tree. With all of his body fighting to just report his myriad injuries, Ilwa struggles to focus his eyes on the Nuka-Lavi as it strides toward him. And beyond the point of fear, too weak even for that, Ilwa simply regards this thing as it looks at him, as it approaches him. And then, after a moment, without any other acknowledgement to his continued existence, the Nuka-Lavi leaves. And then the dark takes him. Much to Ilwa's shock, he awoke in hospital under the care of the monks of the Black Abbey in Sarum, with his friends all around him. According to the monks, both he and Sir Aaron had been found by a traveler in the night who spirited them away to the abbey as soon as he found them. By the attendant monks' reckoning, whoever had found them was an expert physician with truly esoteric knowledge, and according to the monk, Erin's condition was severe, and she would likely need a great deal of time to recover, or else a miracle. As for Ilwa, he was much worse off. His injuries had blinded him in one eye, and he had nearly died several times over, even under the monk's care. It had been a gift from God that he had even lived through the night. Still, the monk warned that Ilwa's days were numbered. The monk, you see, he revealed that he had studied certain obscure texts, and he had actually encountered something similar, a description similar to what Ilwa was going through, the pustules on his skin, and the symptoms that he was experiencing. The monk revealed that Ilwa had contracted a disease known as mortashine, which was closer to supernatural than anything medical. See, mortashine was a disease of such power, a supernatural curse with such potency, that it would be capable of depopulating an entire island within a matter of weeks. It was so contagious, it spread from horse to man and vice versa with such regularity and speed that it could instantly, basically, infect an entire population. Under normal circumstances, the monk said, Ilwa would be dead within 4 days, as well as everyone else in the abbey and possibly Sarum and so forth. However, the monk pointed to a sigil that had been branded into Ilwa's neck. This sigil the monk explained, was an arcane sign, a seal placed on Ilwa, presumably by the traveler. And what this seal did is it diminished the intensity of this curse. It actually staved off the worst of the disease and gave Ilwa the vitality to survive for 4 years rather than 4 days. Even so, the potency of the seal would wear off. Ilwa would be dead within the next 4 years. For months, Sir Ilwa persists in a state of living death, forced to sit on the sidelines while the other knights sail with Prince Madoc along the Saxon coast, warring against the barbarians and devastating their ships. Their mutual friend, Sir Melkin, another one of the knights, he had managed to successfully petition God to heal Sir Erin of the worst of her wounds. He had prayed over her, and God had seen fit to return her from her crippled state. And they were already whispering that Sir Melkin was a living saint. The sick came to him and begged his blessing, though he was a knight and not a holy man. Sir Erin, for her part, lingered in her paganry, even a genuine miracle not enough to secure her conversion. Meanwhile, Ilwa suffered despite his prayers, his coming death a specter that neared with every hour and every day. And in spite of his diminished state, Ilwa forced himself to accompany King Uther on his progress between the castles of the great lords. He had been asked, as a great orator, one who had personally helped win the sword, to tell the story of how King Uther came to possess Caliburn. It was a task that Ilwa threw himself into despite every ache and pain that he suffered, enduring the barbs thrown by the bagshots, that he was some kind of leper who was being kept out of the gracious mercy of the king rather than out of any real skill. Ilwa persisted in his duty and served the king faithfully all through the summer, and all the while Ilwa sought for a remedy to his woeful condition. Where prayer went unheard, where healers failed him, and with Merlin on one of his many sabbaticals, Ilwa turned to unorthodox measures. Consulting his companion, the wandering bard Elyan, Ilwa learned of a cunning woman who dwelt in Sir Fain's lands, a woman called Old Beth. When summer came and the king had no further need of Ilwa's attendance, he and Elyan traveled into the forest where the small folk said that Old Beth dwelled, and after some searching, they found her hut, this long-forgotten ramshackle place, and they negotiated their way inside. Asked directly for a cure for the Mortasheen, Old Beth acknowledged that she had access to certain powers that could take the curse from off of him, but that such a working would come with a great cost. And worried that the cost would be his soul or certain unsavory sacrifices, Ilwa recoiled and thought better of himself. He thought to rebuke the witch, but was himself chastened. See, the old woman, Old Beth, she simply requested a new home, one nicer and finer than her present dwelling, and this, it turned out, was a price that Ilwa was more than willing to pay. So after months of toil conducted largely by his peasants and coming entirely from his own purse, Sir Ilwa managed to meet the needs of the old wife, and so, with her snugly moved into her new home, they set about the working. With her environment to her liking, Old Beth tells Ilwa that she will require 2 things to deliver him from his curse. The first is his blood, readily available, and Ilwa is quick to bleed himself into a small bowl. Just as he does so, Ilwa weakly asks what the second thing will be, what the second item must be. At this, Old Beth explains that she cannot destroy the curse. She can't break it utterly, because such an act is beyond any practitioner she knows of. She can, however, transfer the curse to someone else, and for this to be accomplished, she will need an article of personal significance from someone with whom Ilwa has a strong emotional connection. At first, Ilwa despairs, horrified at having to sacrifice someone he cares for in order to save himself. But he's come so far, he has to find a way. He buries his hands in his face and weeps at the choice before him. Who could he give up to save himself? One of his fellow knights? His lady wife? The Earl who had been like a father to him? No, surely there had to be some other way. And then he considered the witch's words, and he realized that hatred is also a very strong emotion. And there was only one man who inspired such passionate fury within him. Only one man who had openly mocked him for his sorry state during the king's progress. Only one man who had tormented his friends, insulted his lord. There was only one person it could possibly be. At Ilwa's bidding, Elian the Bard returned to Stapleford, to Ilwa's Manorlands, to his stable, and he retrieved the saddle of Sir Garin of Bagshot. Ilwa's neck exploded as Old Beth drew the mortishine from his veins. The seal placed by the mysterious traveler stretched beyond its limits. The pain was intense, burning through his body like he had motor oil coursing through his veins, nearly enough to cause him to just lose consciousness. Still, Ilwa pressed through it, forced himself to stay awake until the ritual was done. He saw the black tendrils that the Nuklavi had breathed out drain from his body. He saw Old Beth bind it to the saddle. He saw it turn to smoke as she burned the saddle. This black, vile thing coursing up through the cottage chimney and drifting towards Bagshot. And he never felt guilty. Ilwa left Old Beth's hut with a poultice on his neck and a song in his heart. Sir Garin of Bagshot died quickly and painfully, his family and household following in short order. The mysterious disease didn't stop there, though. See, through the horses that the Bagshots traded, the disease spread to other lands and other houses. Soon, a plague was ravaging the heart of the kingdom of Logres. And as scores died, the lords responded in a panic. No one really knew how to handle something on that scale, something that killed that quickly, something that spread seemingly at mere sight. And no one knew where it came from. But that's a story for another time. If you guys liked this, let me know in the comments down below. I'd really like to do some more stuff like this in the future, and I want to know what you guys think about it. As always, thanks for watching. Bye for now.